Do you believe we're in any way responsible for the behavior of our ancestors who lived hundreds of years ago and did horrific things? And in what ways do we continue to perpetuate the harm that was done? My guest today talks about our long history of racism and the need for forgiveness and reconciliation at the individual level, at the level of our families, and also in society at large. Hi, this is Marlena Fiol from Becoming Who We Truly Are, a YouTube channel that deepens our understanding of who we are, but also who we can become. If you find value in this video, please give it a thumbs up and maybe even click the subscribe button on your screen. It makes a big difference. And for a look into my own life and the challenging lessons I learned along the way, we recommend my memoir, Nothing Bad Between Us, and also our new historical novel, Called. The web addresses of both of these are in the show notes. I am truly honored to introduce today's guest, Tom DeWolf. Tom serves as the executive director for Coming to the Table, which is a nonprofit organization that provides resources for all who wish to acknowledge and heal the wounds of racism. In Tom's first book, Inheriting the Trade, published in 2008, his family confronts its legacy as the largest slave trading dynasty in U.S. history. In 2012, he co-authored with Sharon Leslie Morgan, Gather at the Table, The Healing Journey of a Daughter of Slavery and the Son of the Slave Trade, which won the Phyllis Wheatley Award for Best Nonfiction Book. His latest book with Jody Geddes is The Little Book of Racial Healing, Coming to the Table for Truth-Telling, Liberation, and Transformation. What a big topic for one little book. It summarizes Coming to the Table's approach for facilitating racial healing and transformation. I believe that forgiveness and reconciliation are important paths to healing. Today we're going to explore the challenges of healing the living wound of racism, which continues to fester. We see it in the significant disparities between whites and blacks in average household wealth, unemployment, poverty, infant mortality, access to health care, life expectancy, education, housing, the criminal justice system. The list goes on and on. At the end of this brief interview, we'll recommend additional informative programs on oppression, justice, and forgiveness. Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tom, can you briefly describe Coming to the Table and how you got started on this journey?
Yeah, the folks who started it were both European descended and African descended people who were connected by the legacy of slavery, either through ancestors owning ancestors or being related by blood. And when they got together, the inspiration for the name was from Dr. King's I Have a Dream address, in which he said, I have a dream that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave masters will join together at the table of brotherhood. And so this group of folks that were descended from the legacy of slavery brought together about 24 of us back in 2006 at Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, for a weekend of studying trauma and trauma healing and restorative justice. And so from 24 people, now there's literally thousands of people at the table through 40 local affiliate groups in 16 different states, and between 4,000 and 5,000 people in a very active Facebook group, something like 3,500 people that get our monthly newsletter. It's just really grown rapidly, and particularly in the last few years as racism has become more uncovered with what's been happening politically in our nation and the kind of example that's set by people in power in our nation.
Yeah. So what have been some of the major breakthroughs at the table that you might describe for us?
I guess the one that comes to mind first and foremost is the power of being in relationship, connecting with people that were trained either overtly or implicitly to fear or not trust. What led to this, my second book, Gather at the Table with Sharon Morgan, was the two of us agreeing to. I mean, racism is huge. All the oppression based in race is systemic throughout our nation and throughout the world. And a lot of people just throw up their hands, what can I do? And Sharon's and my approach was to look at racism from the perspective of two people, a descendant of enslavement who is African American and a descendant of enslavers who is European American, and get each other's perspectives, just hearing each other's stories.
Yeah.
And it was just an amazing experience spending so much time with her. And, we've become just the closest of friends, which we didn't know would happen or not.
Yeah.
But it's the profoundness of the relationships that I think has certainly helped in my own personal evolution and transformation.
Tom, what are some of the key reasons in your experience for people resisting coming to the table? Is it fear?
Well, I think ultimately everything comes down to, that old things become cliche for a reason. So that old cliche that we're either living in love or in fear, I think that our life experiences boil down to those two broad categories. And I had learned that I was related to slave traders, but I never knew this growing up. And I went on this trip, the beginning of which, it's like, who am I to vilify people who lived hundreds of years ago and did terrible things? I wasn't alive then. I wasn't walking in their shoes. Who am I to judge? But over the course of that particular journey, standing in a slave dungeon on the coast of Ghana, and having the feelings of what people must have been experiencing, the horror of the abuse, the being ripped away from your family, from your home, being enslaved for the rest of your life, and your children and your grandchildren. And it's like, no, these folks knew what they were doing. It was an evil thing. They knew it was an evil thing, and they did it anyway because of the benefits that they received: money, power, prestige, land. I was about 30 miles to the east of Los Angeles, and I spent a lot of time being afraid as a kid, afraid of anger, of people who looked like me, afraid of the anger of people who didn't look like me. And I just want to be safe and happy, and I think most people do. And we want our families to be safe and happy and successful. And anything that rocks our world, rocks our boat, our natural tendency is to be afraid of it.
Yeah.
That response of fight or flee or freeze.
Yeah.
It's normal, it's natural, and it's healthy, it's good, unless it's creating fear in us for something that will allow us to become healthier as individuals and as a society.
Yeah. I have to tell you, and I'm sure my listeners agree, that I'm awed by the magnitude of what you're taking on in coming to the table, the challenge of forgiveness and healing you're addressing, and As you know, this podcast explores the need for healing at very different levels, including my own personal journey. My question to you is this: in what ways, in what substantive ways, does healing trauma at a personal level, or say within a family, differ from healing the kind of collective wound that you're describing?
That's a big question. I guess I don't see collective healing without individual healing. We have for centuries collectively decided that people who look like me, European descended people with lighter skin, are better, frankly, are higher on the pecking order. And the consequence of that is what benefits me tends to damage other people. So if I don't transform individually, the collective isn't going to transform.
And it seems to me it's basic human dignity that we're talking about restoring when we say restorative justice.
Well, yeah, and I think when we talk about restoring, what we're trying to restore is our best selves, our best humanity. There's so much wonderful scholarship now that can help us understand the wounds and how to heal those wounds. My Grandmother's Hands is one of the most amazing books on trauma and the impact that racialized trauma has on white people, Black people, and police officers, and what we can do about it. And just a beautiful, beautiful book. And it's stamped from the beginning. Looks at how our nation has been stamped from the beginning. How racism that's what we're founded on, and so being founded in a wounded state, being created in a wounded state, it requires healing if we're going to restore ourselves to what we imagine our birthright of truth, justice, fairness, honor requires. Everyone who's had children or who has had parents, I guess that's pretty much all of us. We have these relationships that are complicated, and that's the most important thing that I have learned, is acknowledging the complex nature of every individual and every relationship with every individual in our lives. And whether that's the legacy of slavery, or it's the legacy of patriarchy, or the legacy of religious intolerance, all of these isms, these systems of oppression, grow in that same rich soil of fear. And it's this fear that I'm going to lose something if somebody else gets something, rather than understanding that abundance is infinite, love is infinite, kindness is infinite, justice is infinite, when we choose to understand our ultimate interconnectedness now and always throughout time.
Well said. We've talked about forgiveness. What about reconciliation? What does that really mean in the context of healing wounds of racism?
When I look at racism in the United States, when I look at when European people arrived in this country and literally annihilated 95% of the indigenous people who were here before, who enslaved millions of people, stolen from the continent of Africa and brought here, when Europeans marched to the Southwest and stole land from what was formerly Mexico and wiped out all sorts of Hispanic people in the process, who so horribly abused people of Asian descent in this country, who locked up Japanese descended people during World War II in essentially camps, concentration camps in this country, and who now are separating families of immigrant people who are trying to get away from horror in their own lives into the land of hope and dreams that we tout this country to be. And we've got children being separated from their moms and dads for months and longer at a time. And I don't see any time in the history of this country where there was a healthy relationship between the European people who came here and everyone else. Mm-hmm. So how do you reconcile? The word that I've come to use a lot more is transformation. What we're really trying to do is transform from something that has been dysfunctional, oppressive, unjust, horrid, into something that we claimed in our founding documents to be all about freedom and, just the power of the individual to seek life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, we've never lived up to those ideals. So what we're talking about is not reconciling to something that existed in 1776 or in 1625 or in 1492. It's transforming ourselves into the thing that we've been bragging about for a long time but have never lived up to. And if there's one thing I think we do a really poor job at in this country, it's dealing with issues of shame and blame and guilt. We love heaping it on other people and using it as a weapon rather than using them as opening of doors to explore what it is that I'm feeling guilty or ashamed or blamed over.
Yeah.
And then I use those things to build my walls, to protect myself from any further woundedness. It's a fallacy. It's silly. It doesn't work. But we do that. It's a natural response.
Tom, I love how you have taken this topic, this huge collective issue, and you bring it consistently back to the individual level. And I'm going to get to perhaps the most personal level and ask about something that you write about, which is the need in looking at healing racial tensions, the need for self-forgiveness. Can you speak to that?
It's certainly one of the hardest things that any of us can do. It's when we think of forgiveness, it's usually wanting to forgive other people for the damage they've caused in our lives. And yet so much of what we carry around, so many of our wounds are because of the harm that we've caused other people we love, people we work with, people we encounter in other ways. And then we think, I'm just not good enough. I'm not the person I claim to be outside, and I'm going to keep this part hidden. I'm keeping this to myself. But really what we spend so much time beating ourselves up for not living up to our own version of who I really believe I am, just as the United States doesn't live up to the vision that was established by those folks we call the founders so long ago. And so the biggest question any of us can ask ourselves, I think, is, do I love myself? Do I forgive myself? And that's the hard work. I struggle with that, honestly, all the time.
Yeah. It doesn't get more real than that. So if there were one last thing that you'd like our listeners to know or to hear today from you, what would it be?
I think about interconnectedness more and more these days. More and more, I believe that interconnectedness is where home is. And that once we recognize that and embrace that, that we will, in fact, be kinder, be more generous, be more loving towards each other, and work in a way that holds each other up and doesn't fear each other.
This has been a very meaningful conversation, and unfortunately we're out of time. Tom, thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Well, you're so welcome, and I'm just deeply grateful that you've invited me to be here with you and all your listeners today. Thanks.
If you've found value in this program, please do give it a thumbs up or hit the subscribe button. It really does matter. And if you'd like to listen to my full hour-long interview with Tom DeWolf, the web address can be found in the show notes below. In addition, so you know, I'll be posting a new YouTube show each Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Also, please post comments or any questions you might have for me. I am interested and I'll respond promptly. For example, what part, if any, do you believe you've played in the racial injustice that exists in our world today? For those of you who are deeply engaged in your own quest toward becoming who you truly are, my path may not be yours. It's a way forward toward increasing peace for me, but naturally only you can decide what path fits your needs. For further information on oppression, justice, and forgiveness, we recommend the following resources. First, a TEDx presentation by Peggy McIntosh on how studying privilege systems can strengthen compassion. And a TEDx talk by Megan Ming Francis inviting us to get to the root of racial injustice. And finally, for a look at my own experiences with racism, growing up on a remote leprosy station in Paraguay, South America, we recommend my memoir, Nothing Bad Between Us, as well as our new historical novel, Called. The web addresses of each of these are in the show notes. And remember, we are together on this journey.